Hey everyone, and welcome to our first of the mini lecture series for Fundamentals of Human Trafficking. So the purpose of this video is just going to be to quickly talk about kind of our own stereotypes and myths that we might hold about human trafficking and kind of all set us all on the same page, if you will. My intent is to have many short videos instead of big, long 30, 45-minute videos. So that you can easily listen to the content whether you're at home or at school or at the gym. And so here we go. So this slide really serves as an overarching slide to all of the material in the course. And this is just to say that we're going to talk about sensitive topics at times. We'll talk about things like, let's say, for assault, for example. And so if you ever need to take a break or pause, or you want to talk to me about something, really just take care of yourself. I realize that some of this material can be triggering. We're going to have adult language, we're going to have sensitive topics, so you come first, you're the priority, so just take care of you. Okay, moving on. So let's talk about some stereotypes for a quick second. And I kind of want you to either close your eyes or just think for a minute. I'm going to say a word, and I want you to think about what are the first things that come to your mind when I say this word. And don't judge your reactions. Simply just let it come come into your mind, and think about what you're seeing or visualizing. So the first one is pimp. I'll let that sit there for just a second. So pimp. What do you think about when you think of the word pimp? Okay, got it? Everyone have an image? All right. So I have done this presentation a lot live with audiences, and for the most part, to be honest, people think about this image when they think of a pimp. So they say words like chains and gold and fur coats and canes. We get it all, right? So these are kind of the images that we tend to think about as a culture, maybe not you individually, but as a larger society, when we think about the word pimp. And most of us probably think this way because of movies and TV, and, you know, kind of rightly so. Like, this is the cultural image that we've been trained to think about. I remember when I was little, Pimp My Ride was a big show on MTV. And so that's, you know, pimps were seen as cool, they were seen as fun, they were seen as wealthy and powerful, and we all kind of developed this image over time. And that's not even to mention the fact that a lot of pimps are in music and movies. The costume one that you see here, the guy with the green hat, this is actually just a costume that you can buy for a pimp if you want to be that for Halloween, off of Amazon. So clearly it's really heavily ingrained in our culture. So the next slide now, I want you to think about I want you to picture an image again when you think about the word John. So John is the buyer. So when you think about the buyer of, I'm not going to even say sex trafficking victims, but just when you think of the buyer of sex, who do you think about? What images come to mind? Who do you picture? Picture that again. So the buyer. So more often than not, people tend to visualize a older, often Caucasian, kind of creepy-ish looking person who sort of is this type that would like live in mom's basement and is like online being a predator, right? So we tend to get this image. The reality, of course, of the buyer of sex is very different. And it can be the same, but really it's varied. But this is kind of who we think about when we think about people who buy sex. We don't think about the guy next door. We don't think about the physician or the pastor or kind of the average person, we tend to think about this sort of creepy image of a person. So next up, when you think of the victim of human trafficking, who do you picture being the victim in your mind? What comes to mind when I say victim of human trafficking? So again, more often than not, people picture this. They picture small, weak. Most people picture females, women or girls. Typically girls, they picture kind of dirty. They picture kind of sad looking, vulnerable. But this is typically what people think of when they think of who are the victims of trafficking. I mean, time and time again, when I say I do human trafficking research and work, most people's response is something like, oh, so like you rescue the girls from Thailand, you know, and that's just not quite the reality of what we see here in the US, but this is what people usually picture. Lastly, what do you think of when you think of the word prostitute? I'm going to guess that a very different image than the one currently on the screen comes to your mind. But what do you think of when you think of the word prostitute? Okay, so most people picture something like this. They think of pretty women, they think of stilettos, they think of kind of glamorous and sexy, they maybe think of drugs, scandalous clothing, again, often women and girls, but there's a very big distinction between what people think about here versus the other image that we saw. So prostitute, they tend to picture people who are doing it autonomously. They want to be doing it. They're making money. They're happy doing it, maybe even, but certainly victim of human trafficking and prostitute are not the same in most people's minds. In terms of location, people tend to picture it being the red light district in Amsterdam or developing countries. They don't tend to think about their backyards as being maybe a human trafficking site. So they picture usually a place far away from them, and this is probably either because they're misinformed or because it's easier to distance themselves from this kind of a problem and pretend it's not happening in our local communities. But people tend to picture places, you know, far away and developing. So this is all to say that if it doesn't fit our stereotype, the chances are we miss it, we don't see it. So if we picture human trafficking one way, if we come across a situation or see something that maybe is human trafficking, but doesn't fit what we're looking for, we'll likely miss it, right? So we're here in this class as part of it to kind of give you a picture of what human trafficking actually looks like. So that one of the purposes of leaving this class is that you are better equipped to recognize what human trafficking looks like in your community and also in your future workplaces. So the reality is that it's not just girls, it's not just kids, it's not just Caucasian kids, it's not just Native American kids, it can be anyone. It can be anyone of any socioeconomic background or ethnicity. It can be any education level, any family environment type, any age, any gender, anyone. There's no one set victim or vulnerable population necessarily to trafficking. And it can happen anywhere. So the book that we're going to be reading for this class takes place in a little suburb outside of Detroit, Michigan, a really wealthy suburb. If you're from Arizona, I would kind of compare it to Scottsdale, but a really wealthy, higher upper middle class community. And so it doesn't just happen in Thailand or in Eastern Europe. but really it's happening in communities and neighborhoods all across the United States. I need to provide you quick with the federal and state definition of trafficking so that we're all kind of on the same page when we're talking about what the definition really is. So I know that you can read that, but in the US, sex trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting of a person for the purposes of a commercial sex act in which the commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such an act has not attained 18 years of age. So there's something really important in this definition, besides just a bunch of big words. Basically, the first part that I have bolded there means that sex trafficking does not have to be where someone's moved across a country border or even a state line. You can harbor someone in your own home and be selling them for sex, and that could be sex trafficking. So it does not require movement despite what people think. The other thing is this piece on force, fraud, or coercion. Really important. So if somebody is under the age of 18 and they trade sex for anything of value, whether that is a place to stay, or drugs, or shelter, or a new iPhone, or a purse, or food, or anything. If someone under the age of 18 trades sex for something of value, it is sex trafficking, period, end of story. It's easier to argue those in court because it's so much more black and white. However, when somebody turns 18, this magical age that we've established as adulthood, in a court of law, in order for it to be sex trafficking, force, fraud, or coercion have to be proved, which right now might seem no big deal, but proving things like fraud and coercion can be really tough. And so that's probably one of the reasons that we don't see a lot of sex trafficking cases prosecuted, because proving that someone coerced you or lied to you is tough. So that is just something to note. And our last slide here is just saying that there's a really fine line here between human trafficking victims and what we think about as prostitution. I think we tend to assume that when somebody becomes an adult, they're then choosing to sell their body for, to sell sex for money. They're choosing this. They're an autonomous adult. They're engaging in this willingly. When in reality, most people who sell sex for money started when they were children. Most people didn't wake up one day and decide, you know what would be really fun is to sell my body for some cash. Now I'm going to say that there are people who 100% are in control of this. They do not have a pimp or a trafficker. They keep the income. They want to be doing this, but the large majority are trafficked. They have some kind of a pimp or a madam or a trafficker who's ahead of them, who's taking that money, who's controlling their decisions, who's made them believe that this is all they're good for. They have no self-esteem left, no skills, like they don't believe that they have skills to do anything else, they've gotten them addicted to drugs maybe, they've gotten them a felony maybe so that they can't get housing or a stable job. And so I want to reframe our mind to think that there's a lot more gray area between what we consider a human trafficking victim and a prostitute. And we tend to criminalize prostitution, and when we know it's human trafficking as a child, we tend to label them as victims. And it might not be fair, the labels that we're assigning to people based on whatever set of standards that we're using to judge that. Okay, that is the end of video number 1. So I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much.